Hi, I'm Dr. Manimala Silvinaikar, and this is the first part of my series on critical thinking. Uh, so, in this part, we are going to talk about parts of an argument. Now, when we want to make an effective argument, okay, we first must know the parts of it, because without knowing the parts of it, we will not be able to arrange our argument in a logical fashion. Now, having known the parts of it, we have to make sure that each statement we make is true. There are no fallacies in the statement, because even if one statement in your list of flowing list of statements is false, then that may cause your argument itself to fail, right? So we'll have a look at the argument in the next slide. Okay, I recently made a claim. So what is my claim? My claim is that man is equal to God. Now, why did I make that claim? I made it because it was a logical proposition. Now, what evidence do I have for that claim? I have evidence that man has a proven autonomous legal system. That means he can make and execute laws by himself, whereas God does not have a proven autonomous legal system, right? If God indeed makes laws, then he is dependent on humans to execute that laws. Now, many countries are secular and they do not have laws uh, which are defined in any, what shall I say, scripture. All right. Now, underlying my argument, which I did not make explicit, that means these were implicit warrants or assumptions, was that God exists. And I think everybody agreed with that. There was no pushback on that. And the second is that God is almighty, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. Now, here there were some posters who equated or likened God with the parents, right? Now, this is inherently problematic argument because God is a creator of the solar system, whereas your parents cannot create the solar system, right? So you are comparing, apples to oranges. Now, the third is that God does indeed make laws for humans. So I think we all agree that God makes laws for humans. So I came to the conclusion that man is equal to God. So now you can see that my claim is the same as my conclusion, and how I'm able to make that conclusion because the parts of my premise, that means the claim, the reason, the evidence, the warrant, are in and of themselves. Each statement is true, and none of those statements have been refuted. Now, even if one of that has been refuted, then my argument is in danger of falling, right? But no one refuted that argument, any one of those statements. So, um, so these are the parts of an argument. Of course, in the next slide, I will tell you why I claim that man has a proven autonomous legal system and God does not have a proven autonomous legal system. Okay, so why am I making the claim? Now, I'm making the claim based on this chart, as you can see. Now, in a secular legal system, right from being the lawmaker to the enforcer to the arbitrator to the executor, we have humans in the role. You've got parliament, police, the judiciary, and the prisons office, right? So, this secular system is autonomous. It does not need any guidance or interference from God, or that is not dependent on God in any way. Now let's look at the religious legal system. All right. Now, if we claim that God makes laws, then we are still dependent on the human police, the human judge, and the human prisons officers to execute that law. Okay. So this leads me to the conclusion that while humans can be autonomous uh, in their legal system, God cannot be autonomous in his legal system. Right. Now, before somebody jumps up and says that, I'm an atheist and things like that, I am not an atheist. I'm a Hindu. I belong to the Shaiva Siddhanta sect. And as a Hindu, I'm obliged to question Hindu scriptures using logic and reasoning. Of course, if you are too busy in this lifetime doing cardiac transplants, then never mind. The next lifetime also you can, what do you call it, do the questioning. No rush, okay? Okay, now let's come to my claim. So the crux of my claim is, or the heart of my claim is that I'm saying that part of the religious legal system is dependent on humans to enforce it. Okay, so I've highlighted that part in yellow. Now, in order to refute me, you have to have certain elements proven. Okay, now some of them are that God indeed does possess an autonomous enforcement system, like a divine taser system for humans. Okay, now it may not be very, what do you say, remarkable, but it must exist. A good example I can give you is, let's say there is a divine law somewhere that says, if you put your hand into fire, I will burn your hand. Okay, and somebody who disobeys God puts their hand into fire and immediately gets burnt. Correct? So that is an immediate divine retribution system. Now, God is not dependent on other humans to execute that punishment. The moment you put your hand in, God will burn it. Okay? So you must prove that somewhere, right, such divine punishment of religious law exists, right? This autonomous punishment exists. That's number one. Number two, you must prove that God doesn't inherently need humans to execute his law. That's a general statement. You see, okay, that is quite easy to prove because God doesn't need our permission for the sun to rise and sun to set and things like that. So that is easier to prove. Now, of course, item one, you can give the example of fire. Now, nobody is going to be overwhelmed with such an argument, but at least the argument is true. All right. And the second one is where he doesn't inherently depend on our help, make the sun rise and set, is also inherently true. Now, the third thing is you have to prove that God has the system in place to punish humans autonomously. But for some reason necessary for our own existence, He very graciously allows us to do it. Okay? So the reason why we are allowed to carry out God's punishment is because our survival depends on it. Right? Not because God doesn't have any, what do you call it, can't do it on his own, but our survival depends on it, right? So if you can prove these three things, now sometimes the proof may not be so overwhelming that people are going to be so convinced, but at least you have it, as you have made true statements, right? So to some extent you can refute my claim, right? Now the other problem I notice is that uh, many commentators, they don't understand the difference uh, in the way that certain terms have got a common language meaning and a scientific meaning. For example, hypothesis in the scientific term is a guess, educated guess, which can be tested by further investigation, right? It is possible to test the claim. Now, again, theory. Now, theory is not an idea. A theory is an explanation of a natural phenomenon, and this explanation is supported by facts, tested hypotheses, and laws. Okay, so that's why a lot of I've heard people saying that the theory of evolution is just an idea, it's a theory. No, no, no. That common language theory is different. Scientific theory is different. Then the third is the law. It's a statement which summarizes the relationship between variables. For example, if you go to an army camp, given that the condition being that the BMI remains the same for all, the BMI requirements remains the same for all uh, military men, then the height of the weight of the candidate will be dependent on his height. Okay, because we have maintained that the BMI is the same, so the height and weight are dependent on. I mean, the weight is dependent on the height. Right? Now we come to fact. Now, fact are statements which cannot be easily disputed. Okay, it's very difficult to dispute a fact because usually it's something is called a fact after a long time of being tested, right? Unlike an inference. An inference can be quite easily refuted. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say I'm given a picture of people walking around a street with holding black umbrellas. Okay. Now, for me, I can make the inference that it's probably raining there. But another inference is all equally possible that people are walking around with umbrellas in that street simply because the people living in those flats keep throwing rubbish out of the window, so they're protecting themselves from the rubbish, not from the rain. So likewise, an experiment is a control method of testing a hypothesis. All right. Now, when you make the argument, you have to make sure that every statement that you make is an accurate statement. Okay. You cannot construct reasoning based on faulty or what do you call it? Invalid statements, right? Now, some examples: an unjustified premise or a proposition. All men are created equal. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong in this. In a court of law, all men are created equal. Rich or poor, if you commit a crime, you'll have the same punishment. But in weightlifting competition, all men are not created equal. All right? Because some men are born smaller size, less muscle mass. Some men are born taller with greater muscle mass. So while the statement itself is not inherently wrong, it is inherently wrong if you use it in a weightlifting competition. All right. Then things like incorrect assumption. If I make an assumption that if my porch is wet, that means it has rained. Now that's incorrect assumption because it could just as well be wet because somebody has washed the porch. Right. So you have to be careful about making these incorrect assumptions. Then you have to make sure that any deductive or inductive reasoning that you use is valid, right? And the last thing is you cannot ignore relevant contradictory evidence, right? Because then the other person will bring it in and then your whole argument goes. So you have to factor in all these things and come up with a train of thought that counters my argument. Okay. Next is common types of fallacies. Now, this is one of the things that I noticed looking through the comments was, and I don't blame the commentators because you see, there's a lot of confusion out there when you Google on Google, on the internet, you'll find that slightly different meanings are given. So this one I've taken from Grammarly, which I think they are quite reliable, so you can use them as well. But when you use or when you impute or imply one of these fallacies, please um, define it. Okay, so the other person listening to you knows what you're talking about. Okay, now some fallacies you cannot use, like an ad hominem argument where you attack the messenger instead of the message. Now that you cannot do. All right. Now the other common one is appeal to authority. Now you can appeal to authority in certain circumstances where it's a scientific authority and which has been tested and interrogated many times and found to be true. But when it comes to non-scientific authorities, then it's harder. The other thing is a circular argument where both the premise and the conclusion is the same, right? The same statement. Uh, this is a very common argument, especially theological arguments, circular arguments, right? So you have to make sure that these type of fallacies are not present in your train of thought, right? Okay, thank you very much.